I want to thank you for joining the SDV Chamber's nonprofit webinar presented by our Nonprofit Council. For those who recognize my voice, my name is Peter Warda with the Chamber, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Before we begin, I would like to make a quick announcement. The Chamber is pleased to present the launch of our Focus SCV Leadership Program now and transform it from a small classroom format to a webinar for our entire business community. For the past several months, we've been working with COC and the Employee Training Institute to prepare this program. It'll be a two-part virtual program on emotional intelligence, which is designed to help support our business community during this time. You can find that series and all our upcoming events on our website, scvchamber.com, under the Events tab. As you know, earlier this year, we launched our Nonprofit Council. Our nonprofits, all of you, are a key reason why our Valley is a great community. The council is intended to provide the resources for our nonprofit leaders to help them connect, grow, and learn about valuable information that will help meet the organization's goals and missions. Our goal is to connect the local business community with all of you, so that way we learn about the latest nonprofit trends. As we begin our program, I'd like to first thank our presenter, Holly Schroeder, President and CEO of the Santa Clarita Valley EDC, for helping put together today's important webinar. Obviously, it's no secret the COVID-19 pandemic has had a dramatic effect on our local community, and it'll continue to impact our lives for months to come. Unfortunately, with social distancing being our new reality, Holly is going to discuss how our nonprofits can move forward in the changing world and what needs to be considered as we settle into this new format. Holly, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you now.
Great. Thank you, Peter. And thanks everybody for joining this morning. As Peter said, most of you probably know me, if you know me, as President and CEO of the Economic Development Corporation. And I have also spent the better part of the past 20 years working either running nonprofits as well as consulting for and serving on boards. And so I've done a lot of different work with a lot of different types of nonprofits. I don't want to claim that necessarily makes me an expert, but I thought I'd have some perspectives to start a conversation for the Nonprofit Council about what is the future holds for the Santa Clarita Valley nonprofits. And so that's what we wanted to start today. I also had my previous role, I worked as the executive officer for the Building Industry Association, which is the trade association for home builders, and I had that responsibility in the midst of the Great Recession, and so both worked at the Los Angeles chapter level as well as the Southern California level, really being at sort of the crux of that crisis, since it was centered largely, or it certainly had a nexus in the home building industry. So really was at sort of the depths of that and had to navigate that organization as well. So in talking with Ivan and Peter, they thought we should have some discussion with our nonprofits about sort of where things stand and how we might move forward as a region and what might be needed. So I was going to cover 5 topics you can see here on the slide, starting a little bit with kind of how nonprofits should be assessing their financial condition, how they should be thinking about their services, communications with board and stakeholders, and then do our best in this webinar format to start a conversation about the future for the Santa Clarita Valley. So I would echo what Peter said about please send in questions and comments. It is a little bit, one way since I'm talking and you're typing, but we wanted to start somewhere, and this seemed like a good place to start that conversation. So obviously, the number one thing for everyone right now, for businesses as well as nonprofits, is, cash is king. So as we start thinking about our financial condition, and Peter, go ahead here, everybody is paying attention to where they're doing their financial assessment and looking at how things stand. And this is, I think one of the things that gets sometimes people forget when they're leading nonprofits, this is true of board members as well as the executives and any of the staff, that even though the nonprofit is it's providing a service. Many times, the nonprofit is an extension of government or an extension of business, or some middle ground in between. It really is a small business. And so understanding the financial condition is, and treating it like you are really running a business in that way. It's a business that has different goals than a normal business in terms of profit, and it has different goals in terms of tax status, but it functionally is a small business. And therefore, as on the next slide, as I say, cash is king, and that is no more true now than anywhere else. So I wanted to give you a couple of tools to really start to describe where you guys are financially. And I'm starting with the finances, because if you don't have a decent financial status, then we're not, then everything else starts to become moot. So we obviously want to make sure that we have the financial wherewithal to keep moving forward with the services and the the responsibilities that you are offering to the community. So in business, we often talk about, and go ahead, Peter, what we call a quick ratio. Some of your board members of the business people may use that term. The quick ratio is really your ability to pay your current obligations. So it's how much cash do you have, or things that can be quickly converted into cash. How much immediate receivables do you have over relative to your expenses? And so that is, a quick, hence its name. This is often sometimes called the acid test. There's other names for it, but the quick ratio, just like, are we able to pay the bills right now with what's happened? And what has happened with this is, I think, is an especially important and quick analysis. Most of you have probably already done this, whether you called it this or not, because you are, you just, things sort of stopped in their tracks with the way that the COVID-19 safer at home orders were put in place. And so we very quickly had, things sort of stopped, right? And everybody is, still, shaking from that. And so most of you probably have already done this in some way, shape, or form. And then the longer term analysis starts when you really start to factor in your reserves. So again, we want to look at sort of your longer term position with your reserves. Again, cash and cash, things that are quickly converted to cash, and restricted cash. That could be money that you've put into other forms. A lot of times it's in a different account that has different access. Sometimes it's in some form of investments. Could be in CDs. It could be even in equities, in which case it may have taken a hit, depending on how that was invested. So, that is really trying to look at what is your sort of overall financial holdings and your typical month, your expenses, your routine expenses on what you're doing. And this starts to give you a picture of, at current operations, how long can the organization continue? Prior to the Great Recession, the rule of thumb for most nonprofits was that they should have 6 months-ish of reserves available, and that was kind of the rule of thumb. After the Great Recession, the rule of thumb for nonprofits increased to 9 to 12 months. I think the nonprofits that took that advice and built those reserves are obviously going to be in much better position, because even with that advice, I don't think anybody envisioned the complete stoppage that we experienced in March. That was sort of, all of that advice and rules of thumb were predicated on, that you sort of decline into an economic downturn, and and then move out of an economic downturn slowly. I don't think anybody had really forecast a sort of cliff that was experienced when the safer at home orders were put in place across the state and the country. So depending on your status in terms of your reserves, that's where we're going to be looking at this. We generally exclude longer term accounts receivable from this type of analysis because we know that depending on your organization's business model, because we know nonprofits cover all types of operations, what you would normally be billing for and where you would normally be seeing your income might not exist anymore, right? Because if you are a theater group, a community theater group, right, you may not be able to have any income coming in. If you have fundraising because you're fundraising for a worthy cause, you may not be having events associated with that. So you typically exclude accounts receivable here because you really want to be looking at sort of what your minimal experiences are going to be there. Let's go on to the next slide here, Peter. The tough place here, and really this has to be done as an individual assessment, is to be thinking about all of your revenue streams individually, and if you have multiple revenue streams, and trying to do a very realistic and conservative projection about what's going to be happening there. Again, if your fundraising is based on events or certain types of activities, if it's direct donations, do you think those will go up or go down? Making sure you have a full understanding of your recurrent expenses. Are you still paying rent? Are you downsizing? Are you reducing staff? Have the expectations for your nonprofit gone up? Are you perhaps you're working in something where do you need more activity and your expenses are going up because there is increased client needs? Those are the types of things. New fundraising opportunities to look at. Many foundations that you might be getting funding from are redirecting all of their fundraising goals towards supporting nonprofits during this COVID crisis, and that might be general operating grants. It might be grants relating specifically to the service that you're providing or the activity that you are doing. So you'll want to keep apprised of those opportunities, staying tuned to new grant opportunities. One certainly that you've received grants from in the past, if you are a grant seeker, to touch base with those grantors to find out what they're doing. Are they adjusting their priorities? You'll want to be looking at that. If you are a 501c3, you are eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program. If you were super quick, you may have gotten your application in the first round before that ran out of money. If you are following the news, you know that the Senate passed a additional funding for the Paycheck Protection Program, and it's 3.5, they're calling it relief bill. Yesterday, we are anticipating that the House will take action on that in the next day or so, and the president has indicated he will sign it. That will increase funding for that. And if you are 501c3, I know there was efforts to allow other types of nonprofits to do that. I haven't actually seen in the bill whether or not that there were changes there. I think it mostly is adding funding. But C3s are available or allowed to apply for that funding, and so if you want to pursue that, you should make sure you have all of your paperwork ready. Be talking to a bank about pursuing that. The final option for funding really is obviously if you have the capacity would be to borrow. If you own a building, if you have other assets that you can lend against. That's obviously higher risk, but depending on what you are doing, what your nonprofit's role is, that is something that can be considered. In some cases, that is why a nonprofit might buy a building or buy, have some assets like that, is so that they can roll up and down as the economy turns, and be able to think about some of those things. So, Peter, I don't know how you want to, if you want to just sort of have me roll through the kind of the whole set of topics, or take questions along the way, or if they're already, or do you want me to kind of run into the next section? I mean, the way I've sort of laid this out is talking about finances, and then we're going to talk a little bit about services, and obviously these things are sort of iterative, they go hand in hand. So I'll just keep rolling forward, unless, Peter, if you want to tell me otherwise.
Yeah, Holly, we'll just keep moving through, and then at the end we'll do the question
Okay.
and answer.
Okay. So this is, again, so this section was about kind of understanding how much, can you continue to operate as is? Is that appropriate given what's happening? And, can you just, what's your financial standing? If, how many months at current activity levels can you last? Or, what sort of is that? Hand in hand with that is looking at, what's going on with your services. And I use the word services very broadly there, but it's whatever it is that is the purpose of your nonprofit. Again, there's nonprofits that are, bringing together like-minded people. There are nonprofits that are doing fundraising for key causes, nonprofits that are providing direct services to vulnerable populations. I mean, so interpret the term service widely as I use it here, because I'm trying to sort of talk, generally about, what's going on there. And so, assuming that you have enough financial standing to continue operations at some level, you start talking about, okay, so what are we going to be doing? And so that really becomes this next question. And I like to use a few quotes. And so, I think what has to be thought about here is that, and I believe, and I may be accused in time of having exaggerated things, but time will obviously tell. I really believe that what's happening right now is absolutely tremendous. I mean, it is fundamentally shifting the way society and activities work. So I would say that this is a time to stop and think and evaluate in a whole lot of ways, including in our nonprofit sector. And I've sort of observed that, when the Safer at Homes, when we sort of really started grappling with and I think realizing the scale of the health threat, the conversation was all about the health, right? It was all about, what is this disease, and how how does somebody get it? Who's vulnerable to getting it, and how long does it last? And all of those questions directly about the coronavirus, COVID-19. And then as time went on, we implemented the Safer at Homes. We start seeing now a lot of questions about the impact on the economy, and there's certainly a lot in the news now, and you're starting to see some states talk about opening up. You start to see, what happened in Asia, where they, they sort of had the virus first, and now are starting to have opening up. And what does that mean for our economy? What does that mean for our businesses? What does it mean for individuals? So it was a lot about personal economy, business economy, macro economy discussions, and that's certainly with the CARES Act and the relief bill that's being moved forward in Congress right now. We're starting to see in the news impacts now, discussions about what does this mean for our municipalities, right? we haven't been out. Sales tax is down. Potentially, income tax could be down. Property tax, if there's an effect on real estate, that could be down. And there hasn't been, but I predict will be, a discussion about what does this mean for the nonprofit sector. And so I think, the timing of us wanting to do this webinar is, I think they're going to start seeing that discussion about what is that impact on our, this on the nonprofit sector in terms of, its viability, what it contributes to our society, and how does that, what is that going to look like? And I think it's incumbent upon us as nonprofit leaders to be thinking ahead to that and anticipating those discussions and thinking about what it means for us, because I, as much as I would love to just sort of, hit the flashback button and go back to, March, 14th, or March 11th, before they said the word pandemic. And, I don't think that's going to happen. I do think that things are fundamentally shifting in the way that things operate and the way that our institutions are going to function and work together. And so I think that's where we need to start our discussion and start, looking at that. So, so as we think about that, and I have a slide here somewhere. So I think what is, again, kind of thinking about all things that your nonprofit does. Some nonprofits, might have multiple activities that it's doing. Are your needs for your clients, and again, I'm going to use the term client broadly, customer, the people that want what you do, right? So again, I use these terms. I tried to use as generic a term as I can, and it's not going to fit, as it might be a little bit of a round hole in a square peg here, but please interpret that in that way. But if you are somebody who is working with a vulnerable population that has folks that are homeless or housing vulnerable, your client needs are, could increase as we see economic risk increasing. If you are to use the other end of the spectrum, you are a community theater group, you can't operate right now. You can't have your things, so your immediate needs decrease, right? And so really, I think that's pretty obvious to folks right away. And then the next question is, it's like, so how could or should I be adapting my services? How is it that I can change? Is there a way to move something online virtually? Is there a demand for that right now? Is there interest in that right now? Or is it there's so much other stuff going on right now that I wouldn't be adding immediate value right now on those traditional things that I've been doing? But are there new needs that are arising here? Are there new opportunities, folks that, there's secondary consequences to what we've been doing. People now are isolated. So maybe I move my entertainment online in order to, if I'm doing theater, I bring that online so that people have something new to look at. What is the consequences of people feeling isolated? What does that do to the population or the people or whatever that I'm working with? For the chamber and the EDC as simple examples, I mean, what we've been doing around supporting businesses in a growing economy absolutely inverts when we're looking at businesses that are shut down, and businesses that aren't operating, may not need services like that right now. They might need services in a couple of months. So what might be to be delayed because they're going to need something when they're coming back, but right now there's not as much that they need. So those are the types of questions that I would be encouraging you to be asking yourself, thinking about here, and articulating in ways. I mean, sometimes these kinds of things become, you as nonprofit leaders think of these responses intuitively, right? It's like you just sort of know, because you know who you're working with, you know what you do so well, but being able to articulate it out loud, articulate it to your staff, if you have staff, articulate it, and we're going to get into talking about board and stakeholders in a little bit. I think that's also really important, to be able to sort of connect the dots about this. I think sometimes we as leaders can, do it so fast and automatically that you don't bring people with you. So I think it's important to say, how your thinking has come along as we go through that. And then some other considerations, and this is where we have to, you really need to think about your operations. How attentive is your board able to be right now? Is your board with you? And I don't say that in a derogatory way, but the reality is that depending on what your board is, who comprises your board, they may be AWOL. And I'll just use as an example when I was in the home building industry, there was a decent amount of time when the board was AWOL because they were all trying to save their businesses, and because of what was happening in the collapse of the home building industry. So their ability to think beyond the end of their nose about what was going on with them and think about, oh, how's that nonprofit that I'm on the board of doing, was pretty limited. So you need to be real about that and honest about that. And likewise, your staff, if you have staff, how adaptive are they? Are they able to roll with the punches and start working from home? What risks do they have during this crisis? Do they have impacted family members? Do they have, what are their own stresses that they're dealing with? If you rely on volunteers, which a lot of nonprofits do, they have volunteers who are part of their network, either for fundraising or for delivering their services. Are those volunteers still available, right? Are those volunteers able to do what they did on March 10th? Or are they not able to, because there's certainly a significant number of nonprofits who rely on volunteers who are in a vulnerable population to COVID, right? So if you have a volunteer network that is elderly, they're not going to want to be out and about for the most part, because they are at risk of contracting and having severe impacts from COVID-19. So you need to rethink, is that network available to you? And how are you going to be able to work with them? If you don't have them, what are your alternatives? Can you hire temporary folks? Do you have the financial capacity to hire financial folks? And again, so you go back to that financial analysis about how your structure might need to change if your personnel or your volunteer network is not operational. There's the basics of keeping things going that I found a lot of nonprofits have not been as well prepared for. So, we suddenly went from, people might, have their office where, they are, working, where they're working together in an office, in a bullpen or whatever, and you kind of just have that federation, and then suddenly you're working from home and you're distanced. And how do you make those connections, right? How do you stay in contact with folks? Are you using a collaboration software? Do you have security if you have clients where you have confidential information? I think it was a shock to all businesses of all sizes to suddenly, in a really overnight type of manner, go from working in an office to working remotely. I found that nonprofits probably have, because we put so much of all the funding that we get towards what we do, towards our mission, we often don't have good infrastructure for that. So you may have done some of that, I call sort of, the equivalent of, duct tape and baling wire. And that's not going to last for that's not going to be sustainable. So we got to make sure that you have that operational continuity. Do you have a way to, if you are receiving donations or other payments, do you have a way to receive those and make sure they get into the bank? Do you have a way to sign checks? All of those sort of little details that can be certainly annoying, but I found that those sort of business continuity plans might not be as strong in nonprofits, and the infrastructure might not be there because we put so much emphasis on putting as much funding as we can into the mission of our organizations. Some types of nonprofits, functionally do have something like a supply chain, whether you're delivering materials to somebody. There's a lot of upheaval in those types of things. Folks in the healthcare sector are they're going to have a lot of disruption because we're moving things around to get supplies to a particular part of that sector to support our hospitals, and that means that perhaps the resources that might otherwise have gone to folks with long-term health concerns that we've been supporting, that there's not as much attention on that. So if you are somebody, affected by that supply chain, it's going to be start figuring out how to make sure that, you have those long-term relationships that might be creating redundancy in those, so that you can make sure that you can continue to have your supplies. And then as everything has been up, topsy-turvied, how do we do our communications? So I'm going to do a whole section on communication, so I'm just going to leave that there for the moment and keep moving on because I'm looking at the clock and I want to make sure we have time for questions and that kind of thing. So even though your board may be a little bit AWOL and frankly may not have the exact skill set that is, maybe they have a great skill set for your overall time, they may or may not have it for right now, and you need to be still thinking about how you're going to engage them. Your board hopefully is positioned to be your best advocate and your best window into the world. Keep going on, Peter. You are the board, and you are charting the future, charting the hope of all of that. And as Peter moves on, I just a quick story from the last recession. I was when I was at the BIA very early on. Most of the things in the recession weren't really registering with the general public very much yet. I had a staff person who left in order to relocate with her spouse, and I was sort of going la 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 on to just fill the position. And one of my board members said, "I don't think you should do that. There's something else going on here." And I hadn't felt it because, of course, the way that the funding works is, they start to feel it in terms of reduced sales. It's going to be the businesses feel it. That's going to eventually trickle into nonprofits and taxes and municipalities, but there's a lag phase. So we weren't feeling it. People were still sponsoring events. We still had lots of membership and all these other types of things. And but they say, no, something's up. So let's hold off on that. And that began what unfortunately became a regular process of, cutting the budget over many, many months, which led into years. But that board member had the astute awareness to say something's up, and let's not do something that we're going to have to undo in 6 months. So your board really can be that window into what's happening in the world. They can help, be your eyes and ears into fundraising, into client needs, into opportunities that are perhaps unfilled amongst your clients. that are consistent with your mission. So your board really can be that, that extension of your mission into the community and eyes and ears on a lot of fronts. So I think involving your board, and certainly your chair, your treasurer, or like that type of position, in the first two steps, the financial assessment and the service assessments. And again, those are sort of iterative type things, but be involving of those key people, if not an executive committee or a full board, depending on the size of the organization. You want to make sure you're getting their insights and their perspectives on that. You'll want to think about, how often is your board meeting? Is your board meeting, do you just keep meeting monthly if that's what you were doing? Do you need to meet more often? Do you need to meet less often? Depending on what's happening. I think those are, you need to pause and not just assume business as usual there. Meetings are probably moving online. And so that means you may need to rethink the meeting, depending on what is involved in your meeting. This format, even, again, as I said at the top of the webinar, one person talking, everybody else listening is it's not a very great format for a regular meeting, and even less so for a virtual meeting. So you might need to do some of that, but how else might you, what else might happen in your meetings? Do you want to use it where you can see everybody, like a Zoom meeting, or do you want more of a webinar format? Is there a way to engage? What are ways to engage the board in your decision making and keep them aware of what's happening in the nonprofit, and the adjustments that are being made, and then do your communications with your board between meetings need to go up or down? Probably up, right? You probably need to be dropping them in emails or phone calls. Ways of touching base, again, hearing from them what is happening in the community that impacts your mission, and what's happening with them, what are they seeing? Again, the more you have kind of that insight, I think it will be, it's going to help you as you keep going forward. Go ahead, Peter. And then last piece here is your stakeholder communication, right? You have folks that value your nonprofit, be it your funders, be it those who use who are recipients of your service, could be members if you're a membership organization. Again, nonprofits take all sorts of forms. And so as you think about your stakeholder communication, go ahead. I think it's really important, and there are a lot of good examples out there. If you've not sent a message to your key folks about what you're doing, there are some just beautifully worded, plagiarism being the sincerest form of flattery, about saying, we're still here. This is how we're adapting. This is what's going on. Or we're going to take a break, right? What we do isn't needed right now because of whatever change has happened in the world. And that doesn't mean we won't be needed later, but it just doesn't fit right now. And both of those, honest communications, if you've not sent that, I would encourage you to sort of craft that message out to folks, because I think the conversation is, the broader conversation in our world is going to start recognizing the vital role that nonprofits play and the impact that this is having on them. And we want to be part of a thoughtful conversation that isn't just yes, we need to keep them going funding wise. There's probably, that should be part of it, but I think we want not such a simplistic view. It wants to be about, the vital role that nonprofits play in keeping our, our, making that bridge between our public sector and our private sector, and filling that vital role between those areas, and that great role that we play. And I think it's really important that we have thoughtful responses to that. If you are continuing to operate, examples of how you've changed, what you're doing, success stories are always the key when in a nonprofit about something amazing that has resulted from your mission. I think we're going to see, especially for nonprofits that are dealing with vulnerable populations, we're going to see more of those stories. Make sure that we don't get so busy in the moment of adapting to this very topsy-turvy world that we are in, that we don't stop and appreciate those wins, those successes, that we write them down, we document them, and we tell people those stories. Again, let your board be an ambassador out to the world. Make sure your communications are telling those stories out into the world. Tell people about how you're changing, how you've adapted your services and your operations. Are you running leaner? Are you, did you used to do something in person, but you found a way to do it virtually? Or you adapted it just so that you're doing it with social distancing, you're doing it, with, new sanitation, whatever it might be, but how have you made those small changes that are protective of our society, protective of, your staff, your volunteers, and the people that you're working with in there. And so where I wanted to end is talk about nonprofits specifically in the Santa Clarita Valley. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining in here to listen to my thoughts on this topic. I do want to try to figure out ways to have conversation amongst us. The Chamber has launched this nonprofit council to try to support best practices for running nonprofits and connections to the business community, connections to the community at large. We are a community that has a lot of nonprofits. We're a very philanthropic, supportive community to that. And we also, I think we've all probably spoken at one point or another to each other about how event-driven, fundraising-driven some of our nonprofits are. Go ahead, Peter. And of course, a whole lot of events, including the first day of after the word pandemic, the Economic Development Corporation, which I lead, had its economic forecast, which had been sold out for 6-7 weeks or so. We had to cancel it on about 28 hours notice, and rethink how we get that information about, and of course, what information we were getting out had to change because what was understood about the economy had changed so rapidly. So we've rescheduled that till September. Hopefully we get to actually have some kind of meeting, but who knows? I know that several other nonprofits have had to cancel events, hoping that maybe they can redo them in the fall. Maybe they're just pushing off to 2021. But I think what things look like in 2019 as a calendar is not going to work in 2020, and we probably ought to think about ahead to 2021. So I had two suggestions that I wanted to put out there, and then I really wanted to start getting ideas or get you thinking about sort of what does the entire specter of the nonprofit world look like in the Santa Clarita Valley, and then how does that affect your particular nonprofit, and how might we work together so that all of our nonprofits are strong and able to fulfill their missions. One thought was committing to a calendar for those who are having events, whether those are virtual events or in-person events. I think there's probably 3 or 4 calendars out there that have been utilized. So not a single one has 100% of things. So maybe that's something that, again, through this nonprofit council, there might become some agreement on. And then the second thing, and Peter actually is going to sit in on a webinar on this later today, that it conflicts with something on my calendar, but there is apparently a movement nationally towards what the hashtag they're calling is Giving Tuesday Now, which will be on May 5th. So Peter's going to learn more about that later today. But is that something that nonprofits in the Santa Clarita Valley might want to participate in, promote, and us, learn more? I mean, we have to learn more about it. That webinar I think starts at 11 a.m. But maybe there's something, either that or something like it, where we're working together again to talk about the valuable role that nonprofits play. And then I'm sure there are many other ideas. I think you all are playing and working in different parts of the different dimensions of life in the Santa Clarita Valley, and have probably your own ideas. And so I think that's what this nonprofit council can provide, hopefully provide some coordination and guidance, and let's figure out how do we make it so that all of our nonprofits are successful, or can think ahead, really think strategically about what the future looks like, and move forward. So with that, Peter, I guess I'd like to know, if there's any questions, I'll certainly do my best to answer them, but maybe try to see if there's any comments about what the go forward does look like for the Santa Clarita Valley and the nonprofit community.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Again, we'll do the question and answer portion now. For those of you who haven't had a chance, there is the questions box in the control panel. If for some reason when you've logged on, your control panel is minimized, there is a orange arrow. Go ahead and click that. It'll open it up. You'll see the questions box. Submit it there. With that, Holly, I will start with this. I had 2 different individuals who've kind of given the same comment / question, so I'll go ahead and put them together. But it's at last count, there are over 120 501c3 organizations in the Santa Clarita Valley. Some of those nonprofits will fold during this crisis and never to return. Is there an opportunity for some of these nonprofits to consolidate or merge some of these groups together?
Yeah, we saw a lot of that nationally. I don't actually know what happened in Santa Clarita Valley. We saw a lot of that nationally during the Great Recession. In my personal experience, and again, this is a business. When I was at the Home Builders, it was a business group, but we at one point had 7 chapters in Southern California. Eventually, that went down to 4. And we saw that as a national trend, that type of consolidation. I think it's important to think about, are there like-minded, like-mission organizations here, and how might they, how might you bring those missions together? Because I think we have to, thinking back to that financial section, fundraising, if you are fundraising dependent, if you are membership dependent, even if you are, if you're direct contributions, if the longer this sort of safer, again, this is my opinion, the longer the safer at home order stays in place, which obviously is, first and foremost about protecting health, but the consequence of that is going to, there are going to be major economic consequences of that. So we are probably already in a recession. How long that lasts and how quick a recovery is there's, you don't just have to turn on, one of the financial channels and you get lots of opinions, but it is going to be measured, I think, in I don't think there's anybody who thinks it's just going to bounce back. And so we're already seeing, dramatic impacts in unemployment. You're seeing, businesses that aren't going to make it who may have been either directly or indirectly supportive. So I think that we have to, when you do that assessment of your finances, it's important to be brutally honest with yourself and with your board about, what and how things return and what's possible. And then look at, maybe there is another like-missioned organization that you bring together and start a conversation between the boards, between the executives about what the future holds.
Perfect. Holly, next question is, with the pandemic crisis, businesses are in survival mode and will likely not have the kind of cash to donate that they had in the past. What will the nonprofits do to backfill the loss of donors?
Well, that's why that reserve analysis is really important. That's what the reserves are there for. If you've built reserves, you want to do that forecast of how much do you think your fundraising or other contributions are going to decline, and if you fill your reserves there, how many months does that cause you to last, and do you think that's enough? That is probably an exercise you will do a lot. It is going to be a continual iterative exercise that is going to be, we're going to use this much reserves for the next few weeks and see how things will get clearer over time. Right now, since we are still under the safer at home order, it's really hard to predict. But I think as we start coming out of the safer at home and we know, how quickly, over what period of time businesses are allowed to reopen, that will start to shed more light on that. But I would think you're probably doing some form of that analysis at every board meeting and probably a few times in between. And but if your board says don't spend reserves, you have to have a brutal conversation with them saying, no, that's what it's there for. That's why we have them. And you don't want to burn through them. You really got to look at that. I guess businesses call it a burn rate, but you really got to look at it and think and again have that iterative conversation with your board leadership and your full board.
Perfect. And then for everyone who had seen, if you haven't, the EDC Chamber and COC put out a survey yesterday. If you haven't had a chance, we do encourage you to participate in it. But with that, Holly, the next one does come from someone that I believe did participate in the survey, and they've applied and tried everything out there. But they're asking if there's anything that the EDC can offer nonprofit organizations to help receive any of these government grants or loans.
That's a great question. I mean, the PPP, again, I think it is going to be, I think they're going to refund it with another, $300 billion available. And then within that, there are some carve-outs specifically for smaller organizations and organizations that didn't have strong previous banking relationships with SBA lenders. So I can certainly, it's not particularly hard. If you haven't pulled together the information, it's not particularly hard to pull together the information needed for those loans. There are loan templates of the application online, the example of what that is. It might be tedious because you've got to pull together a lot of paperwork about your previous payroll and taxes and things like that. So it's not a small amount of paperwork, but it is generally not hard. I mean, you should have, relative, access to finding all of that paperwork and gathering it. I would strongly encourage folks to start gathering that information now, start talking to, wherever you bank. And if they don't, I would encourage you to talk to some of the other banks in town I know that banks, the smaller community banks in town, Bank Santa Clarita, Mission Valley, Pacific West, Community Bank, they have all successfully had applications be funded. And as well as, in addition to all the big boys, Bank of America and Wells, but, all of those have successfully had loans funded. And again, somebody used the analogy with me of it's like the Old West land grab. Whoever had the fastest wagon to get out to Oklahoma got some land. That's a little bit what this feels like. That doesn't feel fair. It doesn't feel, maybe that's not the best way to do it, but it is sort of what this is like. So get organized and get ready. And then what we're also doing is, seeking out other organizations that may be putting out supplemental grants, and we will certainly keep alerting the nonprofit community about those opportunities as they come up.
Holly, the next question I have for you is for nonprofits delivering services related to regional center funding, is there any word or news regarding whether funding for absences related to COVID-19 will change or continue until further notice?
That's a really specific one, so I don't know. Maybe Peter, send me that or connect me with the asker, and let's make sure we can get them to an answer, because I don't know that one off the top of my head, but I'm certainly willing to help track that down.
Okay, perfect. Well, I will go ahead and send that one. The next one I have for you is, will donor engagement shift, as it should now, to more non-contact, non-event driven model, such as crowdfunding, et cetera?
Yeah, I think so. And that's part of why, and thank you, Peter, for being willing to sit in on the webinar later today about that, Giving Tuesday Now, May 5th. And I think the question that we need to think about in the Santa Clarita Valley is if everybody's crowdfunding individually, is that better than crowdfunding together, or crowdfunding by topic, or, and I think it is going to be much more, it's going to be noisier. I mean, it's already noisy when people are all doing events and whatnot, and it's going to be an even busier, noisier space to try to start doing everything crowdfunding. So that's why I think things like that, focus on a single date could be a good strategy. We'll learn more about that as today, or maybe that's something we want to co-create in the Santa Clarita Valley, Santa Clarita Valley Giving Tuesday. I don't know. I think that's a conversation that I would love to see this council continue to discuss, because we want our nonprofits to thrive. We certainly, want them to, provide that service. Now, in some cases, back to the previous question, we may need to see, if not mergers, we may need to see coordination. I think we need to start those conversations through this council.
Holly, before I get to the next question, I just wanted to mention to you, from what I see on my end, there are quite a few people who have been messaging, agreeing with the coordinated calendar and wanting to kind of see that move. So I appreciate you touching on that. This next question, and I guess if you can kind of talk about if it's possible and or what the process would be, but how would we, as the Chamber and the EDC, encourage local companies to add or increase matching donations to local nonprofits?
That is a great comment, and we should, because we have a lot of companies that do matching funds, but a lot of times those are national. I mean, it could be that it's just it's at the choice of the employee, but sometimes it's not. It's only certain types of nonprofits. I think a campaign around that, as we come out of this and as businesses get back to business, about making sure that matching funds are available and that matching funds are directed to local nonprofits. I think it's a great suggestion, and we could build a campaign around that. And I think Peter, a discussion between the chamber and EDC about how to do that. I think it's a good idea.
Perfect. With that, Holly, I'll just go ahead and turn it over to you real quick if you want to do a quick closer, and then I'll take it from there.
Yeah. So plug for Schlick Art on the great headshot. My address, and that's my cell number, because obviously we're working from home and all of that. But you got my email address. I think most of you hopefully know how to reach me. You can also message me on LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff. But I just want to thank everybody for participating and starting this conversation. Hopefully, maybe we can have another conversation, and maybe people can message Peter about their interest in this. Maybe we do something more on Zoom where we can actually see each other and really start to build a strategy around this, around coordinated, perhaps around coordinated calendar, certainly coordinated crowdfunding and what that might look like, whether that's driving towards this May 5th or something unique for the Santa Clarita Valley, messaging around to our businesses about matching contributions. I think I appreciate everybody again joining in and looking out for the future of the nonprofit sector here in Santa Clarita Valley and the vital role they play. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And once again, on behalf of the Chamber, I do want to thank Holly for this information. And thanks to everyone for joining us this morning. If we didn't get to your question, though, again, please feel free to email hello@scvchamber.com, or if you have my email, please go ahead and send me your question or comment, and we'll try to get you the necessary information. Once again, for additional resources, we do have our COVID-19 page on our website at scvchamber.com. Visit it. We are keeping up-to-date info on there, and so we try to get as much information to you guys as soon as we can. Thanks again for joining us. As always,